The police dog the world forgot. He changed her life on purpose. Claire Morgan didn't come to adopt. She came to donate blankets, that's all. But then she passed the last kennel and saw him. Axel wasn't like the others. No jumping, no barking, just a pair of tired eyes that looked through her like he already knew something about her no one else did. She stopped walking. And that was the beginning. What followed was a journey neither expected, a bond forged not by training, but by trauma, not by obedience, but by quiet understanding. He didn't move when she first reached out, but he didn't turn away either. This is a story about a dog whose best years were behind him until someone saw he still had more to give, and a woman who didn't know she needed saving until a dog too tired to stand reminded her how to feel. The shelter was loud, as always, not with the kind of noise that bothered most people, but with the kind that wore you down, barking, whining, the occasional sharp yelp, conversations between volunteers, children's excited squeals, the metallic clink of kennel doors opening and closing. Life moved fast here. Every hour brought a new family, a new question, a new hope. But not for him. In the very last kennel, tucked into a poorly lit corner, lay a dog who had long since stopped responding to any of it. His name, once spoken with pride and urgency over a police radio, was now faded on a handwritten card taped to his gate. Axel. Age 12, Axel was a large German shepherd with fur that had once gleamed black and tan under city floodlights. Now, patches of it were thin, dull, graying around the muzzle and spine. His legs were stiff, his ribs pressed against his sagging skin. But what stood out most were his eyes, two rich amber pools that had once held alertness, focus, obedience. Now, they held something else entirely. Acceptance, not peace, not trust, just the absence of expectation. Most of the shelter's visitors never even made it to Axel's part of the corridor, and if they did, they hardly glanced his way. Families with small children would gasp at the bouncing lab mixes. Couples cooed over fuzzy puppies tumbling into their arms. People wanted energy. They wanted joy. They wanted wagging tails and lolling tongues. Axel didn't lift his head anymore. He had learned the hard way that hope only ever led to the sound of retreating footsteps. Somewhere inside him the training still whispered, "Pay attention. Be ready. Protect." But those commands had grown faint, like distant thunder. The last time someone had paused in front of his gate, it was to ask if he was still breathing. Yes, he was breathing, but that didn't mean he was still alive. Across the shelter, a young golden retriever barked frantically as a teenager knelt in front of his kennel. "He's perfect," the boy exclaimed. His parents nodded, already filling out paperwork. Behind them, unnoticed, Axel blinked slowly, then closed his eyes again. Time no longer mattered here. The staff tried, in fairness. They put up signs above his kennel. "Loyal, gentle, retired police K9 deserves a home." They added hashtags online, #SeniorDogLove, #StillGotHeart, Adopt Axel. Nothing happened. No shares, no visits, no applications. At some point, one of the volunteers had slid an old, frayed blanket beneath him. It didn't help much against the cold concrete, but Axel didn't mind. He'd stopped registering discomfort. Pain, after a while, becomes a background hum. What hurt more was the stillness, the silence inside. The part of him that had once lunged through fire, sniffed out narcotics under floorboards, or stood firm between danger and his handler. That part had nowhere to go. And so he waited, not in hope, not for rescue, but in the simple, tired rhythm of survival. His food bowl was only half empty. He didn't finish meals anymore. His water went mostly untouched. Each time someone walked past with a clipboard, Axel didn't move. He knew they wouldn't stop. He knew they wouldn't choose him. Outside, the sun slanted low across the parking lot, casting long shadows that crept toward the shelter's rusted door. The afternoon crowd began to thin. Soon it would be closing time. Inside his kennel, Axel stirred barely. His tail twitched once in his sleep, his body curling slightly tighter. Maybe in some corner of his dreams he was back in the patrol car, window cracked, wind in his face, partner at the wheel. Then the door opened again. Not rushed, not loud, just the sound of boots against tile, steady and unhurried. A woman had entered, alone. The fluorescent lights above Axel's kennel buzzed faintly, casting a sterile white glow across the corridor. It was feeding time again. The clatter of metal bowls echoed off the cement walls, followed by the excited howls and barks of dogs springing to their feet, tails thumping like war drums against kennel gates. But Axel did not rise. A young volunteer paused outside his kennel, watching. She was new, maybe 2 weeks in, still asked questions, still tried. Her name was Molly. She bent slightly, peering through the gate. "Come on, Axel. Dinner." Nothing. The bowl was slid through the bottom hatch with practiced quiet. Molly waited, hands clasped. Axel lay still for a moment longer, then slowly, with effort that looked heavier than his own weight, began to move. One front paw, a shift of his shoulders, then, with the stiff precision of age, he unfolded himself from the blanket and limped forward. 3 feet. That was all he managed. He sat beside the bowl, not eating, just near it, as if his presence alone was enough of a gesture. He lowered his head. The food remained untouched. Molly knelt. "He's just so sad," she whispered to no one. Somewhere deep inside Axel's quiet, failing body, the past stirred, not in images, not in sound, but in muscle memory, in the phantom echo of what once was, the roar of a battering ram against a door, the crackle of a police radio, a voice gruff but kind calling his name. "Let's go, Ax." Boots hitting pavement, his paws flying after them. He remembered the smell of adrenaline, the heat of a summer night chase through alleyways, the high of catching a scent. Flash, a man running, gun in his hand, Axel moving like a shadow, no hesitation. Teeth clamped down, take down clean. He was good. He was the best. The scent of boiled kibble wafted from the bowl. Axel flinched. His stomach churned, but the body no longer followed the instinct to devour. It resisted. Everything came slower now. Shelter staff had tried everything. Make him a Facebook post. Put hero dog on his kennel. Waive the adoption fee. None of it mattered. People didn't want the ghost of a working dog. They wanted play, cuteness, Instagram. Axel didn't bark, didn't leap. He barely stood. Another flicker. Snow on the ground, his nose low, a missing girl. Hours of searching. Then a mitten, then the child. Cold, crying, alive. Axel had found her beneath the brush pile before the frost took her. He remembered the warmth of his handler's praise. "Good boy. Saved her life, buddy. That's my boy." That man-officer Grant Lawson was gone now. Cancer took him in 6 weeks. The family didn't want Axel. didn't even say goodbye. They dropped him off in silence. No scent of familiarity remained. No home, no voice, no badge, just blank walls and recycled air. Axel blinked. The food in the bowl had gone cold. He turned away. The shelter manager, Peter, stood down the hall, watching. He sighed. "We've got another adoption event Saturday. Maybe we'll try bringing Axel out again." "No point," a tired voice muttered behind him. "He just shuts down." Peter didn't reply, because it was true. Axel didn't resist, but he didn't connect. He was a ghost in the shape of a dog. Back in his kennel, Axel returned to the blanket, laid down with a slow exhale, back to the wall, eyes toward the hallway. Someone had once called him partner. Now they called him unadoptable. But the truth wasn't that he didn't want to be chosen. It was that he'd stopped believing he ever would be. The bell above the front door let out a tired chime as Claire Morgan stepped into the shelter. She paused just inside, letting her eyes adjust to the fluorescent lighting, her ears slowly absorbing the familiar chaos barking from every direction, the sharp scrape of metal on concrete, the overlapping hum of conversations and animal sounds. It wasn't unfamiliar. Claire had worked in spaces like this for years as a veterinary nurse, but it had been a while, a long while. She wasn't here to adopt, not really. It had been more of an impulse, an empty afternoon, a coffee shop 2 blocks over, a pet adoption Saturday sign flapping in the wind. Something had pulled her feet here before her mind caught up. Just looking, she told herself. Maybe to donate. Maybe to volunteer. She walked slowly down the corridor lined with kennels, arms crossed loosely. Dogs flung themselves against the gates, some barking for attention, some yelping with excitement, a few just whining softly with hope. There were puppies, gangly-legged adolescents, shiny-coated retrievers, anxious eyes and wagging tails. Claire smiled faintly at a golden pup spinning in circles, but she didn't stop. Something tugged her farther down. The hallway grew quieter the deeper she went. Less barking, less energy, as if the life had been sucked from this end of the building. And then she saw him. He was almost a shadow, tucked against the back wall of a dimly lit kennel, nearly invisible. His coat was grizzled, his frame sunken. But she saw him, not just his body, his eyes. They were open, watching. He didn't move, didn't bark, didn't lift a paw like the others. But those eyes, they held her. Not in a way that asked for anything, not even hope. Just presence. Quiet, heavy, unspeakably tired presence. Claire took a slow step forward, then another. Axel didn't flinch. He watched her with a stillness that felt older than time itself. A gaze so full of silent knowing, it felt like he was reading her before she had a chance to blink. She lowered herself down to one knee. No words, no clucking of the tongue, no reaching through the bars, just stillness, a mirror of his. Something shifted in the air, imperceptible, but real. And then Axel moved. Not much, not dramatically, but slowly he lifted his head. Just enough for her to see the curve of his neck, the softness in the fold of his ears, the dust in his fur. He looked directly at her. Their eyes locked. And in that moment, Claire felt something crack open. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was recognition. This was not a dog waiting to be rescued. This was a soul who had stopped waiting, but who still existed, still was. And somehow, impossibly, she knew. He'd once been great. Behind her, a staff member approached quietly. young, friendly, holding a clipboard. "That's Axel," he said softly, like you might speak near a grave. "He's been here over a year." Claire didn't look away from the dog. "He doesn't really respond to anyone anymore," the staffer continued. "Retired police K9. His handler passed. The family brought him here and never came back." Claire finally turned her head. "No one's wanted him?" A slow shake. "They want the young ones. He doesn't interact much. Doesn't sell himself." Claire looked back at Axel. He was still watching her. Not with hope, not with fear, just with presence. She said nothing. Didn't need to. Her hand moved slowly, carefully, and rested just outside the gate, palm open. Axel didn't move, but his ears twitched. Claire could feel her breath tremble in her chest. Her knees ached from crouching, but she didn't shift, didn't speak. She simply waited. Axel shifted. His nose lifted an inch, then another. Then he leaned forward. Not fully, not fast. But he breathed her in, and something in that breath said everything. This one was different. That was the first moment, the one where neither of them knew what would come next, but both would remember it for the rest of their lives. The hallway seemed to quiet as Claire remained crouched beside Axel's kennel, hand still resting near the bars, palm open. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there. She only knew she hadn't wanted to move. Not yet. Not until he did. Axel had leaned in just enough to breathe her in. Then he'd retreated back to his spot, head resting between his paws, eyes half closed like a flame flickering in weak air. But something had happened. Something real. Not loud. Not sudden. But alive. A connection. Fragile as morning frost. Claire exhaled and slowly stood. Her knees cracked from holding still too long. She pressed her hand against her lower back and turned to the young staff member still standing nearby. "What's his story?" she asked softly, still watching Axel. The man shifted on his feet, adjusting his clipboard. He looked barely out of college, probably volunteering part-time. His eyes moved to Axel with a softness that hinted he cared, but had long stopped hoping. "His name's Axel," he said. "German Shepherd, 12 years old." Claire nodded. "I gathered that much?" A pause. The man hesitated, then sighed. "He's a retired K9. Her gaze sharpened. "Police?" "Yeah. Served about 8 years on the force. Drug busts, search and rescue, tracking. He was kind of a legend, actually. One of the officers who worked with him said Axel could sniff out a missing person across 5 acres faster than any tech." Claire felt something shift in her chest. "What happened?" The staffer's voice lowered. "His handler passed away last year. Cancer, fast. The family didn't want to keep Axel. Said he was too much to handle with the grief, the costs, the kids. So they brought him here." Claire's breath caught. "They just left him?" A nod. "Didn't look back. No one's come for him since." She turned her face slightly to hide the sudden heat behind her eyes. Her jaw tightened. "He waited," she said quietly, almost to herself. "He waited for them to come back." The staffer didn't answer, because there was nothing to say. Claire glanced down at Axel again. He hadn't moved. Just lay curled on his tattered blanket, like he had folded himself small enough to disappear from the world. A dog trained to serve, to save, to stand in the line of fire, reduced to a kennel, a metal bowl, and a name on paper. "No dog should end this way," she said hoarsely. "I know," the staffer said. "We've tried, reduced his fee, shared his story online, put up flyers. But most people just want puppies, or something that smiles." Claire's eyes didn't leave Axel. "He was someone's partner." "Yes, ma'am." "He saved lives." "Yes." She swallowed hard. Then she whispered almost inaudibly, "I want to meet him." The staffer blinked. "You mean in person?" Claire finally looked at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear, steady. "I want to meet him properly, not from behind a gate." He hesitated, glancing at his clipboard like it could offer guidance. "I should warn you," he said. "He doesn't really respond, doesn't play, doesn't walk much, sometimes won't even come out of his kennel." "I'm not looking for tricks," Claire replied. "I just want to be near him." A pause. Then the staffer nodded quietly. "All right. Give me 5 minutes. I'll get someone to open the kennel. You sure about this?" She looked back toward the old dog. There was no wag, no bark, just the slight flutter of one ear. Just presence. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said. The metal gate clicked faintly as it unlatched. Claire stood just outside Axel's kennel, her hands loose at her sides, heart hammering beneath her coat. It wasn't fear. It was something harder to name, something like reverence, or the gravity of walking into a room where a fallen soldier lay. The shelter tech beside her, an older man named Ray, glanced over before pushing the gate open a crack. "He doesn't move much," Ray said, voice low. "Some days not at all. We've tried leash time, short walks. He just plants, like his body forgot what it means to go forward." Claire nodded once. She had seen that before. In people, in dogs, in herself after her sister died. Sometimes grief didn't howl. It just made everything still. Ray's hand hovered at the gate latch. "If you change your mind, no one will think less of you." But Claire had already taken a step inside. The air was colder here. The floor underfoot was worn, slick from years of scrubbing, and the scent of bleach couldn't quite cover the deeper smell of dogs and time. Axel lay in the far corner, exactly as he had been earlier, curled tightly, face angled slightly toward the wall, body still as stone. He didn't lift his head, didn't growl, didn't move. But he was watching. Claire could feel it, like a current in the air, low and steady. She crouched slowly, careful not to startle. She didn't speak at first, didn't reach. Just sat there, letting the quiet stretch between them like a bridge she refused to cross too fast. Minutes passed. The kennel was silent, except for the occasional shuffle of paws from a dog down the hall. In that stillness, Claire noticed things others might have missed. The way Axel's paw twitched ever so slightly with each slow breath. The way his ears, not alert but not limp, remained tuned just faintly toward her. Listening, calculating. She lowered her eyes, then lifted her hand, palm open, no food, no command, just invitation, the same way she'd done before. "Hey, sweetheart," she murmured. Her voice was hoarse but gentle. "It's just me. I'm not here to take anything from you." No response. Her hand remained still, hovering inches above the ground. No pressure, no expectation. Axel blinked. Then, so slowly that it was barely perceptible, his head shifted. His nose twitched once. Then again. He sniffed the air. A low breath escaped Claire's lips. Her throat tightened. "Come on, love. Just a little," she whispered. "Just so you know I'm real." Another moment passed. Then Axel moved. Not much. Not a leap. Not a lunge. But his head tilted toward her, and he leaned forward, no more than a few inches, and his nose brushed her hand. Claire closed her eyes. It was the softest contact imaginable. A brief breath against her fingers, a warm, damp exhale of recognition, but it carried the weight of months, maybe years of absence. And in that one trembling motion, something happened that neither of them could name. He had allowed her in, not fully, not all the way, but enough to say, "I still know what this is. I still remember. Trust." Claire's fingers remained where they were, motionless. She didn't stroke him, didn't press in. Instead, she whispered, "There you are." Axel didn't pull away. He didn't move again either, just stayed there, head lowered near her hand, still watching, eyes dim but open, present. And for the first time in months, he didn't feel like a ghost. Ray had been standing quietly outside the gate, watching. He cleared his throat as Claire finally rose to her feet. "I've never seen him do that," he said quietly. "Not once. Not with anyone." Claire didn't answer right away. She glanced down at Axel again, now curled once more against the back wall, but something in his posture had changed. His muscles weren't quite so tight. His breathing just a little slower, quieter. She turned to Ray. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "Then maybe," she said, "he wasn't waiting for just anyone." The leash was soft, faded blue nylon, slightly frayed at the edges. It looked like it had been used before. Claire turned it over in her hand once, then glanced at Ray. He nodded toward the open kennel gate. "I'll help you clip it on. He's used to it. Sort of." Claire knelt again, eyes on Axel, who remained curled near the wall, his nose now resting on the blanket as if the brief contact earlier had taken everything out of him. But he was awake, watching, breathing. "He won't fight," Ray added quietly, crouching beside her. "But he might not follow either." Claire didn't respond with words. She just reached out slow, practiced, and let the leash settle beside Axel. No rush, no command. Then she whispered, "Axel, may I?" A blink. Then the faintest lift of his chin. Ray gently reached forward and clipped the leash to Axel's collar. The small click echoed in the space like a shot. Axel flinched, not visibly, but Claire saw it. The way his shoulder muscles tensed beneath his thinning coat, the way his paws stiffened. It wasn't defiance. It was memory. Some part of him still remembered what it meant to be clipped in. It had once meant purpose. Now it meant nothing, or worse, confusion. Claire gave the leash a light touch. "Just outside," she murmured. "Just you and me. If it's too much, we stop. I promise." Ray stood back as Claire rose slowly to her feet, the leash slack between them. Axel didn't move. For a long moment nothing happened. Then his ears twitched. The leash shifted, and with the effort of someone standing on a battlefield long after the war had ended, Axel stood up. It was not graceful. It was not quick. His hind legs quivered from the strain. His front paws splayed slightly on the slick floor. His ribs showed with every breath. But he was standing. Claire felt the burn behind her eyes return with force. She didn't cheer, didn't move, just waited. Axel took one breath, then another. Then he stepped forward. One paw, hesitation. Another paw, wobble. Then he stopped. Claire crouched again, offering the softest smile. "That's okay," she said. "We don't have to run." Axel looked at her. Really looked. Not just through her. And then he took one more step. It took them nearly 3 minutes to reach the outer door. The hallway stretched endlessly, and every few feet Axel paused. Not in fear, but in disuse. His muscles had forgotten this. His mind had filed it away as no longer necessary. Claire kept the leash loose in her hand. Never tugged, never coaxed. Only walked when he walked. When they finally stepped out into the shelter yard, the sky was cloud-streaked and cool, the late light brushing the chain-link fence in gold. Axel froze at the threshold. His paws met grass. His nose twitched quick, sharp inhales as 1,000 scents came rushing in all at once. Dogs, trees, damp dirt, the hint of exhaust from a passing car. So much life. Too much, maybe. He blinked into the wind. His tail didn't wag, but his chest lifted. A deeper breath. Claire sat on a bench just outside the gate, keeping her body turned toward him but not pressing. Axel stood still, front legs planted on grass, back legs half tucked in uncertainty. Then he moved forward. 5 feet, then 10. His gait was stiff, uneven, but he was walking, not being walked. Claire watched, quiet awe rising in her throat. Axel moved past a rubber chew toy, past a plastic tunnel, past a patch of crushed flowers blooming stubbornly near the fence. And then he stopped, tilted his head to the sky, took a breath so full and quiet that his body shivered from it. Claire felt the moment settle around them like a blanket. It wasn't loud, it wasn't triumphant, but it was holy. He had remembered the world outside his walls, and more importantly, he hadn't recoiled from it. He had taken one paw forward, and another, and another. Ray stepped out, silent beside Claire. Claire didn't turn to look. She just whispered, voice full of something so tender it almost cracked. "I think he just needed to know someone would still walk with him." Ray nodded slowly. In the yard, Axel stood still, eyes closed, head tilted, and for the first time in so long, he let the air move through him, not as a threat, but as something close to freedom. The paperwork had been signed, the kennel cleaned, the leash handed over officially, finally, his. And now, Axel stood at the edge of a new unknown, the parking lot. The concrete was hot in patches, cool in shadow. The late afternoon wind stirred his fur, and for a moment he stood still, nose lifted as if memorizing it. This place of endings, this beginning that didn't feel real yet. Claire knelt beside him. "All right, love," she murmured. "Let's take you home." She opened the back door of her car, careful to tuck the seat cover beneath a soft wool blanket she'd brought just for him. There was a pillow in the corner, a water bowl, half filled and wedged safely. But Axel didn't move. He simply looked at the open door, then at her. Not afraid, not resistant, just uncertain. Claire's fingers brushed under his collar, and she bent her knees to lift him. He was heavier than she expected, but not in weight, in stillness. It was like lifting a statue. His legs didn't struggle, didn't shift. He simply let her do it, body yielding, head tucked near her shoulder. As she laid him gently across the blanket in the back seat, she felt his breath at her neck, warm, slow, and unsteady. A sigh, almost. When she stepped back and closed the door, Axel didn't try to sit up. He didn't whimper or pant or paw at the glass. He simply watched her, and he didn't look away. Claire slid into the driver's seat and paused, both hands on the steering wheel. She hadn't prepared for this part, the quiet between them, the weight of what it meant to carry someone broken in a space, meant for motion. She glanced in the rearview mirror. Axel's eyes met hers instantly. Brown, still, direct, as if asking her a single, silent question. "Are you real?" She smiled faintly. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm real. And you're not going back." The key turned. The car rumbled to life. Axel didn't flinch. His gaze didn't move. As the shelter disappeared behind them mile by slow mile, Claire drove in silence, except for the gentle rhythm of the road and the soft murmurs she offered like prayer. "You did good today." Pause. "I know it was hard." Pause. "You're not alone anymore." She kept checking the mirror. Axel never looked out the window, never lay his head down. He watched her, as if studying every movement of her face, every word she spoke, as if memorizing the shape of kindness before it vanished. 15 minutes in, they passed a stretch of old farmland. Wind rustled through the tall grass. A hawk soared above them in the distance. Claire whispered, "Do you remember the sound of wind, Axel? The kind that isn't behind a cage?" Stillness in the mirror, but his eyes blinked, slow. She smiled. She couldn't be sure, but she liked to think he understood. When they reached a red light, Claire turned halfway in her seat. Axel was still watching her. His head hadn't moved an inch, but there was something new behind his eyes, something cautious, softening. Not trust, not yet, but curiosity. Claire reached a hand between the seats, palm up. Axel's nose twitched, and for the briefest of seconds, he leaned forward, just enough for his breath to warm her skin. Then he rested back down, still watching, still wondering. As they turned down a quiet neighborhood road, Claire whispered, more to herself than to him, "Whatever came before ends here." She didn't need a leash anymore, not right now. His gaze had already tethered him to her, and she would not let go. The car engine clicked softly as it cooled. The wind had quieted. Even the birds seemed to hush as Claire stepped out into the gravel driveway and closed the driver's door with care. She didn't open Axel's door right away. She stood there for a moment, one hand on the handle, the other pressed against her chest, as if steadying herself for something sacred. Then, slowly, she pulled the door open. Axel remained still in the back seat, curled like he wasn't sure he was allowed to move. His head lifted as light poured in. The scent of pine and soil drifted in on the breeze. His ears twitched. "We're here," Claire whispered. She reached in, slipped her arms beneath him like she had at the shelter, and gently helped him out. He didn't resist. His back legs wobbled slightly as they touched the ground, and Claire steadied him with both hands. "You're okay. Take your time." The leash stayed coiled loosely in her palm. She didn't clip it on. Instead, she let him lead. Axel took one step, then paused. Before them stood Claire's garden gate white picket, chipped in a few places, leaning ever so slightly to the left. Beyond it, a narrow stone path led to the front door of a modest cottage tucked in a cradle of cedar and maple. Ivy crept along one wall, and flower pots lined the steps. Axel stared at it as if it were a ghost. Not the house, the memory. His breath caught in his throat. He knew this shape. Not this house, but a house. The familiar silhouette of home. The edges of a life once lived. For a moment, Claire said nothing. She didn't open the gate. She just waited. Axel inched closer. His nose began to work the air in short, uncertain bursts. He could smell wood, earth, copper from the hose, old rust on the gate latch. But beneath all that, warmth. Not the sterile warmth of a shelter. Something truer. His steps brought him to the base of the gate. He looked up at it, then over at Claire. She opened it without a word. The latch creaked gently. They moved forward together. The path felt soft beneath his paws. Dirt and stone, moss in the cracks. There were leaves scattered from the trees, and the air smelled of cinnamon and soil. Axel stopped again at the foot of the porch steps. His tail was low, not tucked, just waiting. His eyes lifted to the door. He remembered a door like that. Not this one, but close enough. 100 nights of lying just behind it, listening for his partner's boots returning. The jingle of keys, the soft hum of a TV left on, the muffled laugh of the man who used to call him brother, buddy, Axeman. Gone. Cancer had taken him in weeks, and in days, Axel had gone from protector to property. The door had shut one last time, and no one had opened it since. Until now. Claire climbed the steps and turned back, holding the front door half open. She didn't call him. She didn't plead. She just looked at him, soft-eyed, and said, "It's yours if you want it." Axel placed one paw on the bottom step, hesitated, then the second. By the third step, his legs shook not from pain, but memory. His body, his spirit, everything in him trembled with what once was, and what might be again. The threshold loomed, not big, not grand, but to him it felt like a border between life and something else. He stood at it, staring inside. The scent of old books, lavender oil, and dog treats met his nose. Somewhere in the house, a faint ticking clock marked the seconds. Was this a trick? A test? Another temporary stop? He looked at Claire again. Still waiting? Still still. He didn't need her to promise him anything. He just needed her not to leave. With a quiet exhale, Axel stepped inside. His paws met hardwood warm from the afternoon sun. No cold cement, no metal walls, just open air. Rugs. A basket of toys no one expected him to play with. Claire stepped aside, giving him space. "Welcome home," she whispered. Axel took 2 more steps and stopped in the center of the living room. He looked around. Couch, low bookshelves, a dog bed in the corner by the fireplace. He didn't lie down. Not yet. But his head dipped low, and for the first time, his body uncoiled. Not fully, but enough. And outside, beyond the open door, the wind blew leaves against the garden gate like a gentle drumbeat, marking the moment the soldier came home. The door remained open. Claire stood just inside the frame, not blocking it, not guiding him in, only present. Her hand stayed lightly on the knob, not to close it, but to show him she wasn't going anywhere. Axel lingered on the threshold, his paws planted on the top step of the porch. his body halfway between two worlds. Behind him, the gravel driveway, the shelter, the forgetting. Before him, quiet rooms filled with soft light and wood floors that hadn't echoed in years. He didn't tremble, he simply waited. And Claire waited with him. No words, no coaxing, just breath and stillness, the kind of silence that carries trust better than any voice could. A breeze moved past them, ruffling his coat. It smelled like the rosemary bush under the window, like cedar frames and old pages. And something else? Something that didn't demand anything of him. Axel shifted his weight, slowly, deliberately. Then he took one step forward. Not for her, not for food, just because he chose to. The doorframe brushed his back as he crossed it, a simple wooden archway. But to Axel, it felt like passing into another world, a world he hadn't dared imagine could still exist for him. He sniffed the air, then the rug, the couch, the base of the bookshelf. Everything was new but not threatening. It was the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty. It felt offered. He moved from room to room slowly, deliberately, his steps uneven but steady. His nose traced the perimeter of each wall, pausing longer near the fireplace, where a folded blanket lay beside a shallow basket. Then he came back to the center of the room. Claire hadn't moved. She was sitting on a low wooden stool now, hands resting in her lap, watching him, not intrusively, not expectantly, just watching, letting him be seen. Axel walked toward her 3 steps, then a pause, another 2, then finally, when only inches separated them, he stopped. He looked up. His eyes were darker in this light, deep brown, aged at the edges with gray fur and time, but in them there was no panic, no begging, no command, just a quiet question. "Are you still here?" Claire didn't answer aloud. She simply slid her hand down to her side, letting it hover. And Axel did something no one had seen him do in more than a year. He leaned in, pressed the weight of his head fully, slowly, against her leg. Not hard, not urgently, just enough. Enough to say, "I'm here. I accept this. I want to believe you." Claire's breath hitched. Her hand moved slowly, gently, and rested on the top of his head. Her fingers sank into his fur, coarse in some places, threadbare in others. She didn't stroke. She didn't praise. She just rested there, grounding him, grounding herself. A moment passed, then another, and in that stillness the entire house seemed to exhale. The couch creaked faintly. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime tapped once and went quiet again. But inside this moment, there was peace. Axel stayed there a long time, his body warm against her leg, his breathing slow and heavy. And when he finally lay down beside her, curling in a way that said, "This spot is mine now," Claire let her hand drift down to rest against his shoulder. "Welcome home," she whispered. His eyes closed, and for the first time in so long, he didn't feel like he was surviving. He felt like he had arrived. Night settled like a hush across the cottage. The wind had quieted. The trees outside no longer whispered. Even the old wooden beams of the house seemed to hold their breath, as if not wanting to disturb what was unfolding inside. In the living room, the lights had been dimmed to a warm amber. A folded blanket rested on the arm of the couch. A small ceramic lamp glowed in the corner, casting long, gentle shadows across the floor. Axel lay on the rug, his body low and still, front paws crossed, ears barely twitching with each sound outside. Claire sat on the floor beside him for a long while, legs folded, reading silently. Her book had closed 20 pages ago, but she hadn't noticed. She was watching his breathing. Not in fear, just in quiet attentiveness, as if she was still trying to memorize the rhythm of him. At one point she said softly, "I'll be right here tonight, okay?" Axel didn't lift his head, but one eye opened slowly, watching, not alarmed, just confirming. Then it closed again. By 11:30 p.m., Claire had made up a bed for herself on the couch. She didn't want to sleep upstairs. Not yet. Not while he was still unsure of the boundaries. The living room would be enough, for both of them. She lay on her side, arm tucked under her head, blanket pulled loosely around her. The room smelled faintly of chamomile tea and the lingering warmth of roasted chicken. She heard Axel shift once on the rug, then go still again. The silence between them wasn't cold. It was earned, the kind that only forms when two beings have agreed, without saying a word, to trust each other enough to close their eyes. Midnight came, and with it, the darkness inside him. It started with a twitch, then a soft, strained whine. Claire stirred, eyes fluttering open. Axel didn't know where he was. In his sleep he was back, not here, not now, but in alleyways, in cracked concrete stairwells, in backyards echoing with shouted orders. He let out a low, panicked growl. His legs jerked forward once, then again. His tail curled tight to his belly. A sound clawed its way up from his throat. It wasn't barking. It was remembering. Claire sat up immediately, blanket falling to her waist. "Axel," she said softly. Not sharp, not loud. His breathing was shallow now, fast. His paws moved against the rug like he was running, but in place. Nowhere to go. Claire slid down to the floor and inched toward him on her knees. He whimpered, her heart cracked wide open. "No, love, it's not real," she whispered, voice catching. "It's not now." She reached out slowly, her hand hovering over his shoulder. Then she touched him, just the lightest pressure. Axel jerked once. Then his eyes flew open wild, unfocused, the whites showing, his body tensed for fight or flight. But he didn't snap. He didn't bark. He just froze. "Axel," she said again, her hand still on him. "You're safe. You're home." His chest rose sharply, then trembled. Then his body slumped, heavy, spent. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She didn't try to pull him close, didn't stroke his fur like one might with a frightened pet. Instead, she just sat there beside him in the half-dark, hand resting lightly along his back, anchoring him. Minutes passed. Axel's breathing began to slow. His eyes blinked once, then again. The tension started to leak out of his frame. His body didn't forget, but it began to remember something else, too. The weight of a gentle hand, the sound of a voice that asked nothing, demanded nothing, just stayed. Claire whispered, "I know that place you go to when you sleep. You don't have to go alone anymore." Axel shifted and barely pressed his shoulder against her thigh. She rested her other hand beside him on the rug, grounding them both in silence. Outside, the wind picked up again. A breeze tapped softly at the window panes, but inside the room, everything stilled. The storm had passed, and on a floor once meant only for footsteps, two souls stayed awake together. The next morning came softly. Sunlight filtered in through the kitchen window, brushing golden streaks across the worn wooden floor. Birds chirped somewhere beyond the garden fence. Inside, it was still, gentle, as if the house itself was trying not to startle its new resident. Claire stood barefoot in the kitchen, hands curled around a chipped mug of tea. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and warmth, but not food. Not yet. She glanced toward the living room. Axel lay exactly where she'd left him the night before, stretched near the hearth, head resting on his paws. His eyes were open, but unfocused, still caught in that liminal space between survival and surrender. He hadn't moved much since midnight, but Claire had seen something in his gaze as dawn broke, a flicker of awareness. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the memory of what hope used to feel like. She walked to the low side table and set a clean stainless steel bowl beside him. The kibble was high quality, mixed with soft bits, warmed slightly the way some dogs liked. He didn't move, not a twitch. Claire sat on the floor a few feet away and waited, legs crossed, mug in hand. Nothing. His nose didn't even lift. She tried again 2 hours later, this time with a spoonful of wet food stirred in, something with gravy. Still nothing. He turned his head, not in defiance, but in withdrawal. Claire watched him, not with disappointment, not with frustration, with grief, because she'd seen this before. Years ago, back when she worked the military vet clinic out near Fort Carson, she'd helped rehab injured service dogs, some retired, some wounded, all confused by the sudden stillness of civilian life. Some of them ate like they hadn't seen food in days. Others, they starved next to full bowls, not out of choice, but because their bodies had gone quiet when their mission had ended, like they'd lost the signal for living. Claire stood slowly and walked back into the kitchen. She opened the fridge, pulled out chicken breast, boiled, no seasoning, just the scent of warmth and clean protein. She worked with care small pieces, cooled just right. She returned to Axel's side, a shallow bowl of meat in her lap. Then she knelt. "All right, sweetheart," she murmured. "This isn't about hunger, is it?" He looked at her this time. Not directly, but the kind of glance that said, "I hear you." She pulled one piece of chicken free and held it between her fingers. Axel didn't move. She waited. Minutes passed. Then his nostrils twitched. A slow breath. His eyes shifted to her hand. She didn't push forward, didn't coax. She simply waited, patient, steady. And then, with a movement so hesitant it broke her heart, he leaned in. His lips barely parted, his teeth never touched her fingers. Just a light tug. He chewed, slow, cautious, as if he couldn't quite believe it was meant for him. Claire looked down at him, and suddenly tears. Not loud, not dramatic, just the kind that rose from a place too deep for words. She wiped her cheek with the back of her wrist and gave him another piece. This time he didn't hesitate as much. He ate. 3 bites, then 4, then stopped. But not because he was afraid, because he was full enough for now. "You did good," she whispered, hand brushing gently behind his ear. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. His eyes closed for just a second. That second meant everything. Later she cleaned the bowl with careful hands, like it had held something sacred, because in a way it had. Not just food, but the moment a forgotten dog chose to say, "I still want to live." It was late afternoon when Claire found herself in the spare bedroom, the one she hadn't opened in months. Dust swirled in slanted light through the half-drawn curtains. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old linen. Boxes lined the far wall, some taped shut, some barely closed. Labels in her own careful handwriting: winter gear, vet files, Benny's things. She hadn't planned on coming in here, but something had pulled her from the kitchen, past the hall mirror, and into this quiet place that hadn't heard footsteps in too long. Axel was asleep in the living room, curled in a soft sunbeam that fell across the rug. He hadn't followed her. That somehow made her trust him more. He knew she'd come back. Claire knelt beside one of the older boxes. The cardboard was soft from time. She peeled back the folded flaps and exhaled as a familiar scent: rose leather, soap, and a memory she'd locked away. There it was, the collar, dark brown, worn smooth with years of use, the buckle slightly rusted, the tag dulled from years of jingling against metal bowls, porch railings, and car doors. She reached in and picked it up. The weight of it in her hand made her still. Her fingers ran along the underside where the stitching had frayed, where Benny, her last dog, had once scratched at it with his hind leg during summer storms. He had been sweet, clumsy, a golden mix with one white paw and a bark far too big for his size. She hadn't opened this box since the day she laid him to rest under the oak tree. The collar still smelled faintly like him. Claire's eyes stung. She sat back on her heels and held the collar in both hands, staring at it for a long while. She thought of Axel, how he'd leaned against her leg without being asked, how he'd taken chicken from her fingers like he didn't quite believe he deserved it, how he'd slept last night and dreamed of sirens. This collar was a symbol, but it wasn't his. It belonged to a dog who had known peace from the beginning. Axel had only known duty, loss, reintegration, the ache of being discarded by the only voice he trusted. This collar wasn't wrong, it just wasn't right. Claire stood, collar still in her hand, and walked slowly back to the kitchen. She opened her laptop, typed in a search bar, "custom dog tags." Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately. She entered the name Axel, then paused. She thought about leaving it at that. Just his name, simple, quiet. But something ached inside her. Something that said this dog needed to be reminded every single day, not just who he was, but what he still is. She typed one more line, then clicked confirm. 3 days later, the small padded envelope arrived. Claire opened it in the living room while Axel watched from his favorite spot near the fireplace. His ears twitched when the tag clinked softly in her hand. She held it up to the light. Polished silver, clean lettering, Axel still serving, still worthy. She crossed the room, knelt beside him, and showed it to him like it was something sacred. "This is yours," she whispered. He looked at it, then at her. She didn't fasten it around his neck just yet. Some moments deserve their own time. But she laid it gently beside his bed, and for the first time, Axel touched it with his nose. The morning of the vet appointment was gray and soft, like the sky didn't want to make a decision. Claire stood at the front door, one hand on the leash, the other tucked nervously into her jacket pocket. The tag had been fastened around Axel's collar just 2 nights ago. It still caught the light when he moved. Axel, still serving, still worthy. She hadn't taken her eyes off it since. Behind her, Axel stood at the threshold, not frozen this time, but watchful. He looked at the open door, then at the car in the driveway. She didn't speak, didn't tug, just waited. After a moment, he stepped forward. The drive was quiet, like before. Claire glanced into the rearview mirror often, not in worry, but in rhythm. Axel lay curled in the back seat, head resting on the blanket she'd folded the night they left the shelter. He didn't pant, didn't fidget, but his eyes never fully closed. They pulled into the lot of a small clinic tucked between a bakery and a hardware store. Claire had chosen it carefully, low traffic, soft colors, staff she knew by name, people who wouldn't rush him. The tech at the desk recognized her instantly. "Claire, it's been years. Wait, is this him?" Claire nodded and gave a small smile. "This is Axel." The woman's face softened. "He's beautiful." Claire looked down at him. "Yes," she said quietly. "He is." Inside the exam room, Axel stood near the table, not shaking but stiff. His paws planted, back legs slightly bowed from the long ride. The vet walked in, Dr. Mayfield, tall, gray-bearded, soft-spoken. He knelt immediately instead of reaching. "Hey, old boy," he said, voice low and slow. "You're the one Claire's been calling about, huh?" Axel's eyes followed him, cautious, curious. He didn't back away. "He's been through a lot," Claire murmured, folding her arms across her chest. "He hasn't seen a vet since, probably before his handler passed." Mayfield nodded, already easing his hands gently along Axel's spine. "We'll go slow." And he did. He checked Axel's eyes with the softest light, tested reflexes, touched joints with care. Axel didn't flinch. He winced once when his left hip was extended too far, but not a growl, not a snap, just quiet tolerance. "He's polite," Mayfield said with a faint smile, "even in pain." Claire swallowed hard. "How bad is it?" The vet leaned back on his heels, hands on his knees. "He's got some stiffness in his knees, moderate arthritis in both hips, early-stage muscle loss in the rear legs. Gait's a little off." Claire's face fell just slightly, but Mayfield raised a hand. "But," he added, tapping Axel's chest with a gentle knuckle, "his heart? Strong, incredibly strong for his age." Claire blinked. Mayfield smiled. "You've got time. Time to help him rebuild muscle, get him on the right meds, give him comfort. He's not beyond healing, not even close." Axel glanced between them, sensing the tone. Claire exhaled, the tension bleeding from her shoulders like air from a balloon. "His heart's strong," she whispered, as if trying on the words. Mayfield stood. "That means something." And it did. To Claire, it meant everything. They left the clinic with a list of supplements, a mild pain med, and a card for hydrotherapy. But none of that was what Claire carried most as she helped Axel back into the car. It was the vet's words. "Not beyond healing. You've got time." In a world that had once written Axel off, someone had just handed him a different sentence. Not broken. Not done. Just beginning again. Claire had always believed that healing wasn't loud. It was quiet, intentional. Something like gardening, where growth often happened underground, invisible to those who didn't wait long enough to see it. So she waited. And while she waited, she worked. She built Axel a ramp. The back porch had 3 steps. Not much, but enough to make his back legs hesitate. So she took an afternoon and some old cedar planks from the shed and constructed a gentle incline, smoothing every edge, lining it with rubber for traction. She added a wide platform at the bottom, where the stone path began, just beneath the maple tree whose leaves had started to turn yellow at the tips. Next, she scattered toys. Not the squeaky kind. Those didn't feel right for him. These were softer, thoughtful. A rubber tug ring, a slow feeder puzzle ball, a stuffed duck with no sound at all. Each one chosen not for excitement, but for dignity, for giving him options. Then she waited again. Axel stood at the edge of the porch, just above the ramp. He didn't step down. He didn't sniff the toys. He just watched the wind. It tugged gently at the branches, rolled a few leaves down the garden path, swirled along the fence like a child running its fingers against the slats. Claire watched him from the chair beside the flower bed. She didn't call out, didn't tell him to go play. Instead, she sipped her tea and said softly, like she might to an old friend sitting beside her, "You were someone before this?" Axel's ears twitched. She saw it, just a flicker, but it was there. She took a breath and continued, eyes on the breeze. "Not just a dog, not just muscle and obedience. You made someone feel safe. You worked through chaos, through danger. You chose to stand between harm and someone else." Axel didn't move, but his body leaned ever so slightly in her direction. Claire set the mug down on the wooden table, folding her hands in her lap. "You know, there are humans who never become anything close to that," she added with a faint smile. "But you did, and it mattered." A gust of wind lifted the edge of the blanket she'd draped over the bench nearby. Axel blinked. Then he stepped forward. Not down the ramp, just one step closer to her chair. Claire didn't react, didn't smile, didn't reach. Just let it happen. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. Axel lay down beside the top of the ramp, paws curled under him, nose pointed toward the garden, but eyes half closed. Not asleep, not alert, just present. Claire leaned back in her seat. "I used to sit out here with Benny," she said softly. "He was always chasing birds he had no hope of catching. Drove the neighbors mad." A pause. "He never saw combat, never wore a badge. But he loved me like it was his full-time job." She glanced down at Axel. "You don't have to chase anything. You've done enough." His tail moved. Once. Barely a flick. But her breath caught. Because it wasn't a startle. It wasn't a reflex. It was response. The garden was quiet but alive. Insects buzzed low near the marigolds. A squirrel darted along the fence. The wind, soft again, carried the smell of soil and cedar. Claire reached for her mug and said nothing else for a while. And Axel lay there, beside her, not playing, not exploring, but not hiding either. Not surviving, just being. The late afternoon light spilled across the floor of the living room, filtered through old lace curtains Claire had been meaning to replace for years. It turned everything golden furniture, hardwood, the gentle curve of Axel's back as he lay half-curled near the fireplace, paws crossed, eyes open but calm. He had been that way for nearly an hour, not asleep, just listening, breathing, existing. Claire sat nearby, folding laundry with slow, unhurried hands. It wasn't a chore today. It was a rhythm, a quiet act to share the silence with him, to remind him without words that not every room needed purpose beyond peace. A small pile of folded towels sat beside her. Beside that, A faded green rubber ball. Not new. Not squeaky. One of Benny's old ones, recovered from a storage box and gently washed days ago. Claire hadn't offered it to Axel. Not yet. It hadn't felt right. She didn't expect him to play. She didn't expect anything. But as she reached for the last towel on the armrest, her elbow brushed the edge of the ball. It fell, rolled, bounced once, softly, and came to rest against Axel's front paw. Claire froze. Axel didn't. His eyes lowered. He stared at the ball for a long moment, like it was some small, round ghost from another life. Then, without lifting his head, he moved. One paw. Just a shift. Just enough. He touched it. Not with force, not to fetch, not to offer, just to feel. To confirm it was real. Then, it happened. So small it might have been missed. So quiet it might have been mistaken for a breeze. But Claire saw it. His tail moved. Once. A slow, single sweep along the floor. It didn't wag again. Didn't continue. Just that one motion, deliberate, unsure, almost startled by itself. Claire dropped the towel. Her hands came up to her mouth before she could stop them. The sound that escaped her wasn't quite a sob, not quite a laugh, something between the two. Because she had waited for this. Not the tail, not the ball, but for a moment where he remembered joy, where his body said, "I still have that in me." Axel blinked slowly. His paw remained on the ball. He didn't look at her. He didn't have to. The message had already been sent. Claire wiped her eyes with the corner of a folded T-shirt and whispered, "There you are." Outside, a breeze passed over the house, rustling the ivy on the walls, moving across the roof like a breath. And inside, without fanfare, without command, a dog who had been forgotten remembered how to feel. The afternoon was warm, the kind of warmth that soaked into wood and bone alike. Claire sat on the back porch, pruning the dead heads off a planter of late-season lavender. Her hands worked slowly, deliberately, the pruning shears making soft snips in rhythm with the wind that rustled the hedges. Axel lay a few feet away on the porch boards, half in shadow, half in sun. His body was relaxed, stretched long, but his eyes stayed open. Always watching, not tense, just aware. In the 2 weeks since he arrived, this had become his preferred spot, by the porch railing, facing the yard. As if something deep inside him still believed he had a perimeter to hold. Claire had never said it out loud, but she liked it that way. The ball of neon yellow foam one-sailed over the fence. It landed in the yard with a muffled thud, bounced once, and rolled to a stop near the rosemary bush. Claire looked up just in time to hear the faint shout, "Eli! No, wait, don't climb that!" Too late. Tiny fingers gripped the top rail of the side fence. A small foot lodged into a crossbeam. A pair of sneakers scuffed the paint. Then a head of messy red curls popped over the top. Axel was on his feet before Claire could even blink. He didn't lunge, he didn't bark. He growled, low, deep, from a place buried in training and memory. A sound that wasn't uncertain. A sound that meant something. Eli froze halfway over the fence. His knee caught on the top rail, eyes wide. Claire stood up fast, dropping her pruning shears. "Axel!" "Hey, easy." The growl deepened. Axel's body shifted forward just slightly, his tail stiff, eyes locked on the movement at the edge of the property. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was protection. a code waking up after months of silence. Claire stepped between them slowly, hands up. "Axel, it's okay. He's just a kid. Just a kid." Axel's ears twitched. His weight adjusted. Claire knelt, placing one hand gently on his chest, the other near his collar. She let her voice drop. "You don't have to do that here," she whispered. "It's safe now. You're safe now." For a few seconds, nothing changed. Then Axel exhaled through his nose. Sharp, controlled. His head turned. He looked at her, and the growl stopped. Eli slid down the fence in a hurry and darted around to the front yard, his tiny feet kicking up gravel. Claire could hear a mother's voice calling, flustered, but forgiving. She let out a long breath and looked down at Axel, who had already sat back down, body still taut but no longer alert. His eyes returned to the fence, then back to her. Not ashamed, just waiting for whatever came next. Claire smiled faintly, brushing her hand down his shoulder. "Still a cop, huh?" Axel didn't move, but his ears flicked at her tone. It wasn't a reprimand, it was recognition. Because no matter how many meals he was hand-fed, how many nights he spent by the fire, there was something in him that hadn't changed and maybe wasn't supposed to. He'd been trained to protect, but now, maybe, he was choosing what to protect. And Claire was learning how to be one of those things. Later that evening, she sat beside him on the porch steps, coffee growing cold in her hands. The yard was quiet again. But Axel still faced the fence, still watching, still guarding. Not because anyone told him to, but because that's who he was. It was just after 10 p.m. when the knock came. 2 short raps, sharp, hollow, unfamiliar. Claire froze mid-step in the hallway, mug of chamomile tea still warm in her hands. The lights were low. The house quiet. Outside, the wind scraped dry leaves across the porch like whispers. She wasn't expecting anyone, not this late. She set the mug down carefully on the hallway table. Every sound felt louder now, the creak of her floorboards, the ticking of the clock in the den, her own breath. Then another knock. Slower this time, more deliberate, and that's when she noticed. Axel had already moved. No bark, no growl, just motion. Precision, like muscle memory that never truly faded. He stepped in front of her before she could react, placing his body square between her and the front door. Shoulders squared, tail low, weight balanced. A wall. Not of fear, but of readiness. Claire didn't speak. She couldn't. Axel's head tilted slightly, ears perked forward, nose twitching at the scent through the doorframe. The moment stretched long and taut. Claire looked at him, not as a dog, but as a presence, like a soldier who didn't need orders, like he had simply waited for something to require him again. She reached for the porch light switch, flicked it on. Nothing. No shadow through the frosted glass, no silhouette shifting behind the curtain. The porch was empty. She held her breath a second longer, then moved quietly to the door. Her hand hovered over the knob. "Stay," she whispered, not as a command, but a pact. Axel didn't move, didn't blink. His body stayed firmly between her and the unknown, shoulders taut but quiet, his presence like stone. She opened the door a crack. Nothing but night air. No footsteps on the gravel. No retreating figure. Just leaves on the wind, and the faint smell of someone's fireplace down the street. Claire exhaled, closed the door, locked it. Then she turned to Axel. He had already relaxed, just slightly. His eyes now scanned the hallway, checking corners, ears still alert. It took her a second to realize she was shaking, not from fear, from awe. "You never stopped, did you?" she said quietly. Axel finally looked at her. No wag, no blink, just acknowledgement. He had stepped forward, not out of panic, not because he'd been told, but because his instinct said, "I protect the one I'm with." It didn't matter that he hadn't worn a badge in years. Duty had never left him. Claire knelt slowly and brushed her hand down his neck, her voice barely audible. "I didn't even hear you move." He leaned into her hand for the briefest second, then sat beside her in the dim hallway. They stayed there like that for a while, human and dog, both listening to a silence neither feared any more. And in that silence, Claire understood something. Axel hadn't just come to live with her. He had come back to life. It was just after dawn when Claire noticed the change. The house was wrapped in that soft, early morning hush, windows still fogged, kettle not yet on, the garden bathed in silver dew. She walked barefoot down the hallway, arms wrapped in an old knit shawl, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. The living room was still. Axel had taken to sleeping by the hearth, always the same spot, always facing the hallway as if he needed to see her if she came into view, as if standing watch, even in rest. But this morning, there was something different. At first, Claire didn't see it. Then she did. Right beside Axel's large front paws, placed with almost deliberate care, was her slipper. Not chewed, not dragged off like some naughty puppy might do, just placed, neatly, gently, like a gift or an offering. Claire's breath caught. She didn't move closer right away. There was something sacred about the stillness. The way the morning light filtered through the curtains, falling over Axel's sleeping body and the worn, faded slipper. It was the left one, the one she always slid on first, even without thinking. And Axel, he was curled into himself, one paw draped lightly over the edge of his blanket, the other brushing the slipper like he'd kept it close through the night. His breathing was steady, slow, but his ears twitched when she stepped forward. She knelt, and that's when it happened. His eyes opened, just barely. He didn't flinch, didn't rise. He just looked at her like he knew, like he'd been waiting for her to see it. Claire reached for the slipper with trembling fingers. It was warm, had been nestled close to him all night. The rubber sole was dusty from the hardwood floor, but the fabric top carried a faint scent of lavender and the worn leather of her skin. She wasn't sure why it undid her the way it did. But it did. A small sound escaped her. Half sob, half laugh. She lowered her head to his. "Oh, Axel," she whispered, "you brought me a piece of me." It was such a simple gesture, but behind it she saw everything he couldn't say. "You matter. I know you're mine, and I want you to know you're home." Her fingers brushed over his head, resting there. His eyes closed again, and for a moment, time folded. It wasn't about collars or commands, past or future. It was just this: a soul offering connection, in the form of a slipper. Claire sat there for a long time, slipper in one hand, the other resting gently on Axel's fur. She didn't need to explain what it meant. She knew. And somewhere deep inside that dog, whose life had been duty, whose body still bore the invisible bruises of abandonment. He knew, too. Later that morning, she didn't put the slipper back in the closet. She left it right where it was, beside his bed, a quiet understanding that sometimes love is not loud. Sometimes it's just a small gesture beside a blanket, offered without words, and received with everything. The sun didn't rise all at once in Claire's house. It crept in slowly, slipping through gauzy curtains and landing in soft slants across the floorboards. It illuminated the space not just with light, but with something far rarer: peace. Claire had never been a morning person before Axel. But now there was something sacred about those first hours. The way the house seemed to breathe before the world outside stirred. The soft click of her kettle, the muffled scratch of nails on wood as he moved, not rushed, not hesitant, just present. He followed her now, not every second, but when she shifted from the kitchen to the living room, there was always that soft shuffle behind her. When she paused to water the succulents on the sill, he sat quietly by her ankle, head tilted like he was waiting for her to narrate the names of each plant again. Marjorie, she'd whisper to the cactus. Franklin, to the aloe. Sometimes she caught herself talking aloud more than she used to, describing the weather, remembering the books she meant to finish, reciting recipes she never quite got around to. And Axel would just watch. That silent watching, the kind that didn't need a bark or a whine, had begun to feel like conversation. Their mornings had a rhythm now, not dictated by clocks, but by healing. She'd gently clip the leash to his collar, and together they'd step into the garden, the world still wearing its early chill. The walk was never far, just down the gravel path past the hydrangeas and back, but Axel sniffed every inch like it was his job. Some mornings, a squirrel would dart across the fence line, and his ears would perk. But instead of chasing, he'd simply observe, alert but calm, as if the need to pursue had softened into something wiser, the act of simply being aware. When they returned inside, Claire would lay out the brush. It had taken weeks before Axel allowed her to use it. The first time, his muscles had tensed beneath her hand like a wound flinching at old memory. But now, as the bristles swept through his coat, he let out the faintest sigh. She always brushed him facing the window, let the light land on his fur, let him see the world he was still part of. By mid-morning, Claire would sit in her armchair, mug in hand, and read, sometimes aloud, sometimes in a hush so low only Axel's ears would flick an acknowledgement. It wasn't always poetry or great literature. Often it was old letters, dog-eared novels, snippets from a faded vet care manual she once kept from her days volunteering with service dogs. Once she read him a chapter from Watership Down. She stopped midway through when her voice cracked, but Axel had rested his head on her foot and stayed there, as if to say, I remember loss too. Keep going. The following week, Claire found herself rearranging the bookshelves. She moved photo albums lower, where she could reach them more easily. She pulled out a dusty picture of her late husband and their first dog, Lucy, and set it on the fireplace mantel. Axel had paused beneath it the next morning, eyes fixed. Claire knelt beside him. She was good, she whispered. But I don't think she ever learned to open doors or bring slippers. Axel didn't wag, but he leaned against her just enough to make her smile. There were no grand gestures in those mornings, just a dog trailing softly behind a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to be followed. and a woman who, in brushing out old fur and reading forgotten pages, had remembered how to make space for another soul. It was in those quiet minutes between the clink of the teaspoon and the sound of Axel's paws against tile that something sacred returned to the house. Not just routine, but meaning. The afternoon sun slanted across the garden, casting long shadows over the grass where Axel lay, his head resting between his front paws. His ears twitched lazily at the sound of approaching footsteps, but he didn't rise until a voice, unfamiliar yet warm, called out with just enough curiosity to make him lift his head. "Is this the legend I've heard about?" Claire smiled, wiping her hands on her gardening apron as she stepped aside to let the young woman through the gate. "Axel," she said gently, "meet June. She's a trainer, works with retired canines like you." June knelt slowly, not reaching out, just allowing Axel to take her in. She was in her late 20s, sun-kissed skin and a quiet calm in her movement. Her backpack was light, but from it she pulled something that made Axel's tail shift once barely noticeable, a worn canvas tug toy. "Not to play," June said softly, "just to remember." Claire stood back, uncertain. "I'm not sure he'll respond. He hasn't really tried anything like this in years." June gave her a knowing look. "Sometimes it's not about getting them to do. It's about reminding them they still can." She began small. A set of short weave poles, no higher than Claire's knees, a makeshift tunnel fashioned from collapsible fabric, and a single low hurdle wide enough for Axel to walk through rather than jump. Claire watched from the garden bench as June crouched beside Axel, not commanding, just inviting. Her voice was low, rhythmic, not unlike a lullaby mixed with muscle memory. "Can you come with me?" she asked, tapping the side of her leg. Axel didn't move, but his eyes, those tired, noble eyes, followed her. That was something. June stepped over the hurdle herself, then looked back. One step, and slowly, with a stiffness that spoke of years and scars, Axel rose. Claire held her breath, one paw, then another. His back legs wobbled slightly, joints uncertain, but he made it over the first line of poles, clumsy but present. He paused after the last one and looked up, not at the toy, not at the course. At Claire. She didn't say a word, but her hands, folded in her lap, trembled with held-back joy. Axel stood, shoulders heaving slightly from exertion, and looked back at June. "Good," she said simply. "Very good." And in that moment, something ancient stirred in him. Not pride, not obedience, recognition. This was what he had done, for years, for people who trusted him, for handlers who had spoken in tones like this. And here, in this sunlit backyard with a woman who wore no uniform and a trainer barely old enough to remember his prime, he still knew what it meant to be useful. They tried again. This time, June held up the toy knot as reward, but as symbol. Axel walked the same path, a bit faster now. His left leg dragged slightly, but his focus never wavered. He paused only once before the tunnel, sniffed the edge, and ducked his head through. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. She had seen videos of dogs racing through such tunnels, young, eager, bouncing. But there was something far more powerful in this old shepherd, slowly making his way through with the dignity of a soldier returning to familiar ground. When he emerged, blinking into the sunlight, he looked again, not at June, at Claire. And then it happened, just the faintest tail wag. That night, Claire added a new page to the small leather journal she'd started keeping since Axel came home. Tuesday. He completed the course today. Not fast, not perfect, but present. And afterward, he searched my eyes like he was waiting for me to tell him he mattered. I did. I told him with my hands, with my tears, with my silence. Sometimes healing looks like a clumsy walk through weave poles in the backyard, and sometimes it looks like a tired dog standing tall again, just to see if you're proud of him. The rain began just after dinner, soft at first, tapping against the kitchen windows like a forgotten rhythm. Claire paused as she rinsed her plate, tilting her head. It wasn't the stormy kind, not the violent downpour that split tree limbs and sent animals scurrying. This was something different, a remembering kind of rain. She dried her hands, looked down. Axel was already by the door, not whining, not pacing, just waiting. She grabbed her worn sweater from the chair and opened the screen door. The scent of petrichor rose to greet them, earth and water and time. Axel stepped forward without hesitation, moving with a quiet dignity that belied the tremor in his back legs. Together they walked to the porch. Claire lowered herself into the old wooden rocker. It creaked under her weight, a familiar, comforting sound. Axel lay beside her, curling his body with practiced caution, and rested his chin on her knee. He exhaled. Not a whimper, not a grunt, just a release. Claire reached for the small book that always sat on the side table. A novel she'd read a dozen times, its corners bent, its spine softened by years of thumbprints and emotions. She opened to a random page. No need for plot, not tonight. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady. He turned the handle slowly, not knowing if the door would open or if it was meant to stay closed forever. But sometimes doors wait for the right hand. She paused, glancing down. Axel's eyes weren't fully closed, but they were far from alert. His ears didn't twitch. His body didn't brace. He was just there, safe, in the moment. She kept reading. The wind carried memories through the hallway, brushing against photographs and empty shoes. Nothing made a sound, but the house listened anyway. Claire stopped again, this time letting the silence settle. It wasn't empty. Not anymore. The rain fell harder for a moment, bouncing off the porch roof in scattered rhythm. Water gathered in rivulets on the edge, dripping in metronome beats onto the old rose bushes below. Axel shifted slightly. His head remained on her knee, but one paw stretched forward, almost as if reaching for something distant. Maybe a dream, maybe a memory. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Her hand found his head. She stroked the fur between his ears, slow and tender, the way she used to when one of her sons woke from a nightmare. The difference was, Axel never made a sound when he remembered. His body remembered the sirens, the heat, the blood. And yet here he was, resting, breathing, trusting. In the hush of the evening, Claire felt it again, that quiet bond forged not by noise or grand gestures, but by presence. Axel had been through fire and silence, gunfire and applause. But now, what healed him most wasn't rescue, it was routine. It was rain. It was a porch, a book, and a woman who saw him not for what he used to be, but for who he still was. She closed the book, didn't mark the page, didn't need to. Then she said, barely above a whisper, so soft it might have been mistaken for the breeze, "Thank you for staying." She didn't expect an answer. But in that very moment, Axel's tail brushed once across the porch floor. Not eager, not excited, just present. Inside the house, the light from the kitchen spilled out faintly through the curtains. The clock ticked. The fridge hummed. Somewhere down the street, wind chimes sang in the distance. And still they sat, man and dog, past and present, grief and grace, not speaking. But in the silence, everything was said. The package arrived on a Wednesday. No return name, just a government seal, faded at the edges, and Claire's full name typed in block letters. It was heavier than expected. Not large, but weighted, like it held more than just objects, like it carried time. Axel didn't move when she brought it inside. He was curled on his usual rug by the window, half asleep but alert in the way old souls are. One eye watched her. He always watched her. Claire sat at the kitchen table, heart beating a little too loud for a package so still. She slid it open with the same paring knife she used to slice apples, her fingers trembling. Inside, a letter on official stationery rested on top, the emblem embossed in gold. She unfolded it. Dear Ms. Morgan, this box contains the service records, identification, and memorabilia of K-9 Sergeant Axel, badge number 712, retired. Her eyes skimmed further, but the words began to blur. She wiped at her cheek, not realizing a tear had already slipped free. She pulled the next item out gently, carefully, as if it might fall apart. A framed photo. Two figures stood tall in the picture, a young man, early 30s maybe, in full uniform, hand resting on the back of a powerful, proud German shepherd. They looked like a team. No, something more. There was a stillness in their pose, a quiet certainty, like they'd seen the worst of the world and chosen to protect it anyway. Claire stared at the photo for a long while before glancing toward the window. Axel was still watching, still quiet, still present. Next came the file folder. She laid it open. The pages were yellowing. Reports, commendations, handwritten notes. She read aloud, softly, like reciting a eulogy. March 17, 2015. Assisted in the search and recovery operation following a school bus accident in the Cascade Mountains. Located 2 survivors under debris. Handler, Officer Brian Hale. Claire paused. Her voice caught on the name. Brian. July 4, 2016. Alerted to unregistered explosive device at city parade route. Evacuation initiated. No casualties. K-9 showed exceptional restraint under pressure. Another page. A final entry, dated just 2 years ago. Retired after 8 years of active service due to Handler's passing from pancreatic cancer. Transferred to temporary foster care. No known next of kin accepted K-9 custody. Status: decommissioned. Claire's hand trembled. That word, decommissioned, as if valor had an expiration date. At the bottom of the box lay one final item, a collar, leather, worn. The metal badge still attached, dull now, but etched with care. K-9 Axel service, loyalty, honor. She held it in her lap, stared at the stitching, one thread frayed on the underside. She thought about the nights Axel woke up panting, the way he scanned doors before entering a room, how he still stood between her and strangers. He hadn't just been trained. He remembered. Claire stood slowly and walked to the window. Axel didn't move. His eyes tracked her, calm and steady. She lowered herself beside him, placed the collar gently next to his paw. "Is this yours?" she whispered. His gaze dropped to the collar. No bark, no growl, but his nose touched the leather. A second passed. Then he rested his head on her lap, just like he had in the rain. She stroked his fur, letting the silence speak. "You saved lives," she said softly. "You served when most people never knew your name. And when it was over, they just let you go." Axel didn't respond, of course, but something in his breath slowed. His eyelids lowered, not fully asleep, but settled. Claire leaned back against the wall. "I'm not letting you go." Her voice cracked. "You're not a ghost anymore." The framed photo sat upright on the table behind them. The man in the picture, Brian, looked so young. Claire imagined his voice, imagined the quiet pride he must have carried, walking side by side with Axel through dark alleys, forest trails, and disaster zones. He was gone now, but the dog remained. The dog still served. And someone finally remembered. It was late afternoon when the knock came, steady, firm, not hurried. The kind of knock that came from someone who had worn a badge long enough to know how to wait. Claire rose from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Through the frosted glass, she could see the silhouette, tall, broad shoulders, a cap in hand. Axel was already sitting up. He hadn't barked, he hadn't growled, but something in his posture changed. Not alert, but aware, like a thread had been tugged inside his chest. Claire opened the door. A man in his 60s stood there. Military-cut hair, weathered lines on his face. His uniform was long retired, but his stance was still squared, precise. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. "Name's Officer Tom Rayner. I served with Brian Hale Axel's handler." Claire didn't say anything at first. She just stepped back, wordlessly inviting him in. The living room felt smaller, with the weight of memory hanging in it. Axel remained by the window for a beat longer. Then, slowly, almost cautiously, he stepped forward. No limp now, just the deliberate pace of recognition. Tom knelt down. "Hey, partner," he whispered. Axel's nose quivered. He sniffed the man's palm. Then, one slow lick. Tom's voice cracked. "I thought you were gone, too." Claire stood to the side, hands clasped, unsure if she should speak at all, but she didn't need to. Some reunions require silence to be holy. "He was always the quiet one," Tom said after a moment, seated on the couch with a cup of black coffee Claire had handed him. Brian used to joke that Axel was the only partner who didn't talk back. Axel was now lying beside Claire's feet. He hadn't taken his eyes off the officer once, but he hadn't moved closer either. "He saved my life once," Tom continued, voice lower now. 3 years ago. Meth raid. Everything went sideways. Brian was pinned, I was down. Axel took out the guy who had the drop on me. No hesitation. He set the cup down gently. But when Brian got sick, the spark in him dimmed. They were inseparable. Axel sat beside that hospice bed every damn night, right to the end. Claire nodded, throat tight. "I read the file. They tried to rehome him, but no one wanted an old dog with arthritis and a heavy past." Tom exhaled slowly. "Most people don't know how to love something that's already been broken." Claire reached down and brushed her fingers over Axel's ear. "Then they don't deserve him." Tom looked around the small, cozy living room, The framed service photo now stood on the mantel. The new collar, still serving, still worthy, rested beside it. "You've done good by him," Tom said softly. "He's not just surviving, he's home." Claire looked down. Axel had moved, just slightly. His head now rested gently on her foot. She didn't say anything, but tears filled her eyes. Tom stood, stretching his back. "I won't stay long. Didn't come to stir up old pain. Just wanted to see him, say thank you. One last time." He knelt again, this time slower. Axel met his gaze. The officer placed a worn patch on the rug in front of him. It was the embroidered shoulder badge from Brian's old uniform. "Keep this, partner," Tom whispered. "It belonged to your boy. You guarded him then. You're guarding someone new now." Axel nudged the patch once with his nose, then turned and walked back to Claire's side. Tom didn't try to call him again. He just watched the old shepherd settle down near Claire, his body slow but deliberate. He wasn't being rude, he wasn't rejecting. He was choosing. And Claire understood it too. At the door, Tom turned back. "Brian would have liked you," he said. "He had a soft spot for stubborn hearts." Claire smiled faintly. "Takes one to see one." Tom gave a half laugh, half sigh. "Tell him I said goodbye, will you?" She nodded. But when she closed the door, she leaned her back against it for a moment and looked at Axel, curled now, with one paw over the fabric patch, as if guarding it. "No," she whispered, voice thick. "You already did." That night the house was unusually quiet. No wind rattling the windows, no distant hum of traffic, just the soft tick of the clock on the bookshelf and the low, gentle breathing of a dog who had outlived too many things. Claire stood at the edge of the living room with the lights dimmed low. Her hands were wrapped around a warm mug of chamomile tea, untouched. Her eyes drifted to the rug near the hearth, where Axel lay, not sleeping, but watching. The patch was still there. The badge. Brian Hale's embroidered shoulder insignia, frayed at the edge, faded from years of service and salt from sweat. Tom had left it behind like someone passing on a folded flag. And Axel hadn't let it out of sight. His head was resting on his paws, but his eyes were locked on that small square of memory, unmoving. Claire approached slowly. Her slippers made no sound on the wood floor, but Axel's ears twitched just slightly. He didn't look up. She knelt beside him, lowering herself carefully until her knees touched the edge of the rug. Her tea cooled on the floor next to her. The fire had died to a soft glow, but its light flickered just enough to catch the gold in Axel's eyes. Eyes that had once scanned doorways for danger, dark alleys for the glint of steel, rubble for survivors. Eyes that now watched a symbol of the man he had once served with everything in him. Claire reached out and ran her hand along the thick fur behind his ears. He exhaled slowly, an old man's breath in a world that had moved on without him. "I saw the way you looked at him today," she said softly. "You remembered." Axel's tail didn't move, but he didn't pull away. "I know you still miss him," Claire continued. Her voice cracked, but she didn't hide it. "I wish I'd known him. I really do." She looked at the patch now, lying between them like a fragile relic, a symbol of duty, of loss, of something that had no words in any language except the one that lives in loyalty. She placed her palm near it, close but not touching. "He's proud of you, Axel," she whispered. A pause. "So am I." Something shifted in the room then. Not sound, not light. just the weight of something unspoken, finally settling. Axel lifted his head, slowly, deliberately, and placed it gently, reverently on the badge, not out of longing, but as if to say, I carried him as far as I could, and now I carry you. Claire pressed her lips together and laid a hand over his head. You're still serving, she whispered, just in a different way. Axel didn't move. He didn't need to. That night, Claire didn't sleep in her bed. She brought a folded blanket and laid it on the floor beside him. Not because she thought he'd be lonely, but because she didn't want the badge to be watched by only one set of eyes. She lay beside him, head resting near his shoulder, the fire casting a faint halo around them both. She thought about all the homes Axel had waited in, the kennel where hope had died slowly, the rooms that smelled like bleach and resignation, the field assignments, the ambulance rides, the end of watch. And yet, he was here, still guarding, still loving, still remembering. When she woke sometime around 3 a.m., her arm had gone numb from where it had rested beneath her. But Axel hadn't moved, his body curled slightly toward the badge as if sheltering it from the night itself. Claire smiled through blurry eyes. You're home now, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she said it to him or to herself. Morning came softly. A thin veil of sunlight crept in through the windows, catching dust motes in a golden dance. Claire rose carefully, draping the blanket over Axel's back. He didn't stir. Not yet. But the badge was still beneath his chin. And when she returned from the kitchen with 2 warm bowls, one of oatmeal for her, one of broth-soaked kibble and chicken for him, he lifted his head. The badge fell to the rug. But only because he was ready to start a new day. The morning had started with promise. Sunlight draped the street like honey. The scent of cut grass floated in from the neighbor's yard. Claire clipped the leash to Axel's collar, his special one, the one with the inscription she had ordered months ago. Axel, still serving, still worthy. His tail gave a soft swish as she opened the gate. Slow but steady, he followed her down the path. They made it to the sidewalk, and for a brief moment it almost felt like they had outrun time. But time always catches up. They had just turned the corner, just past the bush where Axel liked to pause and sniff, as if gathering memories when it happened. His back leg buckled. Claire turned at the sound, the subtle collapse of muscle surrendering to gravity. She dropped to her knees before she even had time to call his name. Axel! He wasn't unconscious, but his eyes were glazed, unfocused. His chest rose in shallow, fluttering lifts. One paw twitched as if trying to stand, but giving up before the attempt finished. No, no, baby. I've got you. Claire's hands cradled his body as she sat in the dirt beside him, uncaring of the cold ground biting her knees. Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled as they pressed against his ribs. She could feel his heartbeat, fluttering like a moth caught behind glass. They carried him in on a stretcher. She insisted on riding in the back of the van, her hand resting on his side the entire time. The vet's office was silent when they entered. The receptionist rose from behind the desk. One glance at Axel's eyes, and her expression softened into something reverent. They brought him to a quiet room. No buzzing machines, no metal tables, just soft blankets on the floor and dim lighting that made it feel more like a chapel than a clinic. Dr. Reyes came in 20 minutes later, her eyes already tired from what she had seen too many times before. Claire sat with her arms around Axel, his head resting on her lap. She didn't look up when the vet knelt beside them. Dr. Reyes placed a stethoscope gently on Axel's chest. The silence that followed was too long, too heavy. Claire didn't ask. She already knew. "It's his heart," the vet finally said, "and his spine. He's been compensating for months. Most dogs wouldn't have made it this far." Claire nodded, her lips pressed into a pale line. "There's no emergency," Dr. Reyes added, voice careful. "Not yet. But, Claire, we're nearing the end." Claire didn't cry. She looked down at Axel instead, at the dog who had once faced down gunfire, who had searched collapsed buildings, who had stood between strangers and danger with nothing but instinct and training. And yet here he was, failing, quietly, in a room scented with antiseptic and lavender oils. She leaned down and kissed the top of his graying head. "Then I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Not now." That afternoon, Claire called her supervisor and took an indefinite leave. "I just need some time," she explained. "It's not a family emergency. It's something else." She hung up, made tea, and pulled a blanket onto the living room floor. Axel was already there, curled against the cushion she'd placed beside the fireplace weeks ago. His breathing had stabilized, but the fatigue still dragged behind his eyes like a storm cloud that wouldn't clear. Claire knelt beside him. "We finished this together," she whispered. Her fingers found the tag at his collar, the one she had made when no one else had seen his worth. She read it aloud now, as if reminding them both. Still serving, still worthy. Axel didn't move, but as the fire crackled, one ear flicked toward her voice. And that was enough. The morning was gentle. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting long, golden stripes across the hardwood floor. Axel lay on his blanket by the fireplace, his breath shallow but steady. His head rested on a folded towel Claire had stitched with his name threadbare now, worn from washing, but still his. Claire smoothed the fur on his side and whispered, "They're coming today, love, for you." She wasn't sure he understood, but when she said, "coming for you," one eyelid lifted ever so slightly, a flicker of something that used to be alertness, purpose. She took that as a yes. At 10:12 a.m. the doorbell rang. Claire opened it to find 3 members of the county's retired K-9 unit standing solemnly on her porch. They weren't strangers. 2 had served with Axel's former handler, Sergeant Nolan Pike. The third, a younger officer named Reyes, had grown up watching footage of Axel's search and rescue operations on old training tapes. None of them came empty-handed. The eldest officer, Lieutenant Griggs, held a small velvet box in his gloved hands. No brass bands, no press. Just 3 men who knew what service cost, and what it meant to remember it right. Claire guided them to the living room where Axel lay in the halo of morning light. The men didn't speak right away. They removed their hats. One knelt beside Axel, running a calloused hand gently along the dog's back. The other reached into his coat and pulled out a patch of faded K-9 badge with Axel's original unit number. "He was one of the best," Griggs said softly. "We never forgot him. We just didn't know where he ended up." Claire nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "He waited for over a year, alone in a shelter. Nobody saw what he still had left." The young officer, Reyes, stepped forward. He looked barely 30, but his eyes were old in the way officers' eyes get when they've seen too much too early. "I was 12 when I saw a clip of him pulling a boy from a riverbank. He wasn't even leashed, just saw the kid and dove." Claire looked down at Axel. "That sounds like him." Then came the ceremony, brief but sacred. Griggs opened the box and removed a medal. It wasn't gaudy, just a simple brass medallion engraved with the county seal, a paw print, and the words, "Service, Sacrifice," still standing. They pinned it not to his collar, he couldn't wear one comfortably anymore, but to the corner of his blanket, just above his left shoulder. Axel didn't flinch, but Claire saw it. When the metal touched the fabric, his head lifted half an inch. His ears, though slack, twitched in recognition. A camera shutter clicked once, then again. Reyes had pulled out a Polaroid, an old one, intentionally analog. He handed the picture to Claire, the edges still warm from development. "I thought you'd want something that couldn't be deleted." Claire took it with both hands, staring at the faded image. Axel lying still, the metal resting just above his heart. A shaft of light cut through the room diagonally, like something from an old war memorial. She didn't cry then, not until they left. That evening, the house fell quiet again. The metal remained on Axel's blanket, its gentle weight a reminder of a chapter completed with dignity. Claire placed the photo in a silver frame. Then she walked to the bookshelf and opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years. From inside she pulled out an old wooden box, the kind with brass hinges and velvet lining. It had once belonged to her late husband, a military medic. Inside it she placed 3 things: the photo, Axel's name tag, and the Medal of Quiet Valor. Then she sealed the lid and wrote a single line on a label affixed to the front. "For the ones who never stopped serving, even when the world stopped watching." The fire crackled low, just embers now. Soft orange glow danced on the walls like a lullaby, flickering across picture frames and the worn outline of the blanket laid beside the hearth. Axel was curled there, his breathing slow and shallow. The rise and fall of his ribs had become quieter these past few days, like each breath cost a little more. But still, he lay in his place, his post, as if, even in weakness, he would not abandon it. Claire sat beside him on the floor, legs crossed under her, a blanket pulled around her shoulders. In her hand was the same mug she hadn't bothered refilling since sunset. Her other hand rested gently on Axel's shoulder, fingers brushing through the thinning fur that had once gleamed with youthful strength. He didn't flinch. He hadn't flinched in a long time. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Leaves rustled against the glass like gentle reminders. Everything changes. Everything ends. She leaned closer, whispering just above the fire's hum. "You don't have to stay for me, sweetheart." Her voice cracked. She hadn't meant it to. "I know you're tired. I know it hurts. You've given more than enough." Axel didn't move at first. Just lay there, eyes half-lidded, tail still. But then, barely perceptible, his ear flicked back, tuning to her voice. A soft breath escaped his nose, more like a sigh than an exhale. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now shimmered with something else. Softness, recognition, and choice. Claire bit her lip and let the tears come silently. She wasn't going to stop him. That was the promise she had made the day she brought him home. "When you're ready, I'll let go." But he hadn't asked yet, and neither had she. The hours bled together, time suspended in the hush of night. At one point, she leaned her head against the armchair beside him, not sleeping, just resting her eyes. She remembered something. A line from a war widow she once cared for in her time as a hospice volunteer. "Some souls don't leave when the pain gets bad. They leave when the person they love no longer needs them to stay." Claire opened her eyes and looked at Axel. Was that why he hadn't gone? Because he still thought she needed him? She reached out again, touching his tag shiny, new engraved just weeks ago. Axel, still serving, still worthy. And she realized he still was. Even now, in the stillness, in the twilight of his life, he was serving, keeping her company, guarding her from loneliness, teaching her wordlessly about devotion that asks for nothing in return. She stroked the fur just above his ear and whispered once more, "If you need to go, I'll be okay." A pause. "But if you can, just a little longer." She didn't finish the sentence. Axel blinked once, very slowly. Then, with great effort, shifted his weight just enough to rest his head on her foot. Not dramatically, not like in movies. Just a quiet act of presence. He stayed. Outside, dawn waited. Inside, love did not ask for forever. Just a little longer. The morning light was soft. It filtered through the curtains in streaks of muted gold, stretching slowly across the wooden floor like careful hands reaching for something now gone. Claire stirred. Her body woke before her mind did. She stretched gently beneath the quilt, hand reaching for the edge of the bed, expecting instinctively to feel warmth, weight, breath. But there was nothing, just folded covers and silence. It wasn't the loud kind of silence, the kind that slams a door shut and leaves you standing alone. No, this one was tender, like something sacred had just left the room, and the walls were holding their breath in reverence. She sat up slowly, blinking the sleep away, letting the truth arrive gently instead of all at once. Axel wasn't there. He hadn't cried, hadn't whimpered, hadn't struggled. At some quiet point during the night, while the fire dwindled to embers and Claire's hand rested on his side, he had simply let go. No drama. No final howl. Just the peace of a soldier who knew the shift was over. Claire moved to the hearth where he'd lain. The blanket was still bunched beneath him, warm with memory, cool with morning air. Axel's body rested like he had fallen asleep mid-watch, eyes closed, legs tucked. Still. So still. She dropped to her knees beside him, one hand pressing to her chest as if to hold something in like grief had weight and it needed bracing. But there were no sobs. Not yet. Just that aching kind of quiet, the kind you only feel when something that mattered more than words has gone. On the collar wrapped gently around his neck was the tag she had ordered. Axel, still serving, still worthy. But there was something else now, a slip of paper carefully folded, tucked beneath the metal loop. Claire's fingers trembled as she opened it. Just one line, written in her own handwriting, from weeks ago when she thought he might leave sooner than she was ready. She had forgotten placing it there. Still worthy. It hit her then. This wasn't just grief. This was the closing of a chapter only two souls had written, one without words, the other without conditions. She pressed her forehead to his, whispered like she was telling a secret the world didn't deserve to hear. "You did good, baby. You came home." The wind moved outside. The day was waking up. But inside that living room, time didn't matter. Axel had gone the way every hero should on his own terms, beside someone who saw him not as broken, but whole. Not as a used-up tool, but a soul. Claire stood up slowly, took one breath, then another. And as the light spilled a little further across the floor, she whispered into the stillness, "You don't have to stay anymore." But she swore she felt it, just for a second, like a flicker in the air. That he would, somehow, always be here. The shovel made no sound at first, just the soft surrender of soil beneath its blade. Claire worked in silence. No music, no birdsong, just the hush of wind brushing through the tall grass, and the rhythmic thud of grief made physical with every dig. It had rained lightly the night before. The earth was damp, pliant-like. Even the ground understood it was time to make room for something sacred. She chose the spot beneath the oldest tree in her garden, a great ash tree with gnarled branches and a hollow that once held nests in the spring and fireflies in the summer. It was quiet here, private, and the view. Axel would have liked the view. She had wrapped him in the same blanket from the fireplace, the one that still held strands of his fur and the faint scent of chicken broth and ash. Not like a burial, more like tucking him in, one last time. Claire knelt as she lowered him, hands never leaving the blanket. Her breath caught, sharp, silent-like something inside her cracked in a place no one else would ever see. "You protected so many," she whispered. "Now let me protect you." The box of mementos sat nearby. She had almost left it inside. But something told her this wasn't just about loss. It was about legacy. Inside the box, his badge. The service photo with his handler creased at the edges, but untouched by time and spirit. And the name tag, Axel, still serving, still worthy. Claire kissed the metal tag and placed it gently beside him. A soldier's honors, buried not with rank, but with reverence. Hours passed like moments. When the earth was finally smoothed over, she placed the stone, hand-cut, slate gray, etched by someone who knew this wasn't just a dog. It wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. The inscription read, "Axel, once a protector, forever loved." Claire sat back, brushing the soil from her palms. It was quiet again, but not empty. There was something in the silence now, a presence that didn't require breath to be felt, a loyalty that didn't need a leash to remain. She ran her fingers over the carved letters, tracing each one like a memory. Protector. Loved. Forever. A soft rustle made her glance sideways. Eli, the neighbor's boy, stood at the edge of the fence, a toy in hand held tightly to his chest. He didn't speak, just walked up slowly, knelt beside her, and placed the toy on the grave. A rubber ball. Axel's first tail wag. Claire smiled through the ache. "Thank you," she said. And though the boy didn't reply, he stayed there with her a while longer, knees in the dirt, heart wide open, in the only way children still knew how. As dusk approached, Claire lit a small lantern and set it near the stone. A warm amber glow bathed the name, as if the earth itself was honoring him now. "Sleep well, sweetheart," she murmured. "No alarms, no duty, just peace." And for the first time in days her shoulders dropped, not from defeat, but from the kind of acceptance that only comes when love has done everything it could possibly do. It was raining again, not the heavy, weeping kind, just a soft, steady drizzle, like the sky was whispering instead of crying. Claire stood under the shelter's awning, fingers curled around a paper form, eyes fixed on the kennel ahead. She hadn't planned on coming back. Not here. Not this soon. But some silences aren't empty, they echo. And the house had been far too quiet. The pup was small, too small for the scars he carried. Part of his left ear was missing. A splint hugged his hind leg. His fur was matted, patchy, dulled by pain and weeks of being overlooked. The card on his gate read, "Chance, 9 months. Hit by a car. Shy. Not recommended for first-time adopters." But Claire didn't see the damage. She saw the way he pressed himself against the wall, not in fear, but in disbelief that anyone might come for him. And suddenly, it was Axel's eyes she remembered, not at the end, but at the beginning, that first trembling step, that glance that lingered. She knelt, just like she had once before, didn't speak, didn't reach, just let him notice her. It took 5 full minutes before Chance crept forward and placed the weight of his chin on her knee. Claire exhaled. It sounded like forgiveness. Back home she laid out a new bed, not beside the fireplace, he wasn't ready for that yet, but near the door, a threshold, not between in and out, but between before and what could be. She opened the drawer where she once kept Axel's things. For a long moment she just stared. Then, slowly, she picked up the tag. It was worn now, edges dulled by time, letters still strong, Axel still serving, still worthy. Claire clipped it onto the new leash, not as a replacement, but as a reminder. When Chance limped into the hallway that night, dragging his injured leg behind him, he paused by the tag, sniffed it, touched it with his nose, then kept walking. She followed him to the porch. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Claire settled beside him, blanket in her lap. No words at first, then a whisper. "Let's carry him forward." In the weeks that followed, Claire learned to love again, not because she forgot, but because she remembered what Axel had taught her. Patience, presence, purpose. Chance never ran. But he learned to hobble fast enough to greet her at the door. He didn't bark, but he wagged his tail like it meant something. He didn't guard the hallway, but he slept near it, like a silent sentinel waiting for no one in particular. And on the day Claire tied a red ribbon to his collar, she looked him in the eyes and said, "You were the one who taught me to open the door again." That night, the wind moved gently through the garden. Somewhere under the old ash tree, the lantern flickered once, then stilled. Inside, warmth, movement, and 2 heartbeats where once there had only been one. In a world that often moves too fast to notice the quiet souls among us, stories like Axel's remind us of the power of second chances, the depth of loyalty, and the beauty of healing. Together. German shepherds like Axel are more than working dogs. They are protectors, partners, and silent witnesses to both human struggle and triumph. What Axel left behind wasn't just a collar or a memory. He left behind a legacy of quiet valor, of choosing love again even when the world had turned away. And Claire's journey reminds us that sometimes we're not the ones rescuing them, they're rescuing us. Every animal has a story. Some are loud and heroic, others are quiet and scarred. But all deserve to be heard. All deserve a home. If this story moved you, maybe it's time to listen to the pause waiting in shelters, waiting for someone to say, "You're still worthy." Because sometimes love begins not with a bark, but with a glance that lingers. And sometimes the most broken hearts become the strongest bonds. Thank you for watching. Hug your dogs a little closer tonight. They remember more than we'll ever know.